Welcome to Hard Script.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. It happened on a Thursday. You'd think it would be something big, something cinematic, a fight, a confession, a moment loud enough to mark the beginning of the end. But it was a laugh, not even a loud one, just a short, sharp exhale that didn't belong to her. We were at a rooftop event, her company's anniversary. Everyone dressed up like they were pretending to be better versions of themselves. She wore a silver dress, hair perfect, smile weaponized. I was standing near the edge of the terrace, talking to one of her co-workers, polite, vague, forgettable, when I noticed she wasn't by my side anymore. I scanned the room and found her by the bar, leaning in too close to a guy I didn't recognize. And then I heard it. That laugh. Not the one she gave to strangers or friends. The one she used to save for me. Intimate. Low. Dangerous. I watched as he touched her wrist. Just 2 fingers. And she didn't move away. Didn't even flinch. That's when I felt it. That shift. The internal snap when everything you ignored finally makes its full circle. I walked over calm. She turned. Too quickly. Eyes wide like she'd been caught stealing. He didn't flinch. Just looked at me and smirked. And said 6 words I'll never forget. She was never really yours, man. I didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stared at him, then at her, and replied, flatly, "She is now completely your problem." She laughed, but it died halfway, right there, with her mouth still open, like the oxygen got pulled from the air. I didn't stay. I didn't make a scene. I walked, out of the rooftop, down the elevator, into the night, and with every step, I didn't feel anger. I felt precision. I went home that night, and stood in the hallway of the apartment we shared. Her things surrounded me. Photos, perfumes, framed memories now hollow. I didn't touch anything, didn't pack, didn't sleep. I just stood there, letting the silence settle into my bones like armor. Because something in me had changed. Something final. There would be no confrontation, no begging, no explanations. This wasn't heartbreak. This was data. A truth delivered not with cruelty, but with clarity. She had chosen. So had I. And now the rest would unfold. Quietly, ruthlessly. Without warning. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted out, with surgical precision. And that's when the strategy began. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. I stayed in a hotel across town. No luggage. Just my phone, my wallet, and a silence so deep it felt like armor. She called twice. I didn't pick up. I didn't even listen to the voicemails. Her voice had stopped meaning anything the moment she let someone else touch her wrist and laugh like it was a secret they already shared. The next morning, I showed up to work earlier than usual, sat at my desk, stared at my calendar like it had answers. That's when Josh, an old friend from college, now my coworker, walked in. He asked if I was okay. I didn't reply. He hesitated, then said something I hadn't expected. I saw her last weekend. At the Whitmore. The Whitmore. She told me she was in Baltimore with her cousin. I didn't flinch. What was she doing there? He shrugged, careful. She wasn't alone. That was all. He didn't give details. Didn't need to. It wasn't about last night anymore. It was about the pattern. The quiet trips. The sudden meetings. The changed passwords. The way she'd started double-checking if I'd be home before heading out. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Not until it stood in front of me and said she was never mine. Josh kept watching me, like he expected something to crack. But I didn't break. I thanked him. That was it. Because now, I had confirmation. And that changed everything. When I finally returned to the apartment later that day, she was there, sitting on the couch, waiting, like a child caught lying. She started to speak. I walked past her, not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't giving her the one thing she wanted now, engagement. She needed a stage. I gave her silence. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while she slept 6 feet away, curled in a sheet she used to wrap around both of us. I could have asked questions. I could have demanded answers. But when you already know the truth, asking becomes weakness. So I didn't ask. I started watching. Not her. Her patterns. The way she held her phone. The way she cleared her browser history. The way she always showered right before texting. It wasn't subtle. It was methodical. She wasn't ashamed. She was calculated. And I realized then, she had no idea I was already gone. Because men like me don't slam doors. We stop holding them open. She kissed me goodbye the next morning like nothing had changed. And I let her. Not because I forgave, but because I had started tracking everything. not with emotion, with clarity. She had no clue that I'd already begun to erase her quietly, piece by piece, like a system shutting down every useless function before a hard reset. No screaming, no begging, just a shift she wouldn't see until it was too late. Some people catch betrayal in a moment, others in a pattern. I found mine in a cloud backup. She left her iPad on the table one night, face down, unlocked. It wasn't curiosity that made me look. It was confirmation. A folder, titled Work Docs. But inside, screenshots, photos of outfits, messages, a playlist titled with his initials, voicemails saved under drafts in her email, quiet little graves of intimacy buried in plain sight. She wasn't hiding it because she didn't think she had to. She believed I'd never check. And that belief? That was my switch. Every log, every timestamp, every contact, I scrolled through them with clinical precision. No rage, just understanding. She had her escape route mapped for months. Her solo trip to Denver? Dinner for two, recorded in a food app. The dead zone, where she didn't have signal. Multiple calls to the same number, a contact saved as Emma, who clearly wasn't a woman. Even the Venmo trail told the truth. 2 drinks, a hotel, a silence that now had receipts. I didn't download anything, didn't take screenshots. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for freedom. After closing the iPad, I walked to the window and stared at the street for a long time, letting it all settle. Not pain, not even betrayal. Data, input, just enough to recalculate the route. She came home half an hour later, humming to herself. The sound of someone winning a game you didn't know you were losing. She kissed me on the cheek. I said nothing, because what do you say to someone whose lie you no longer care about? That night, I began the first phase. I transferred my personal funds to a new account. Quietly, legally, I updated all security settings on my own devices, changed emergency contacts, reviewed our lease, what was shared, what wasn't. I even canceled the delivery service she used, the one tied to my card. She'd notice eventually, and when she asked, I'd have one answer: must be a glitch. Because that's what this was now, her losing access to my world, one small glitch at a time. I didn't change the locks yet, didn't pack, didn't sleep much either, but I wasn't spiraling. I was calculating. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was designing the exit. A clean one. No blood. No broken furniture. Just a door quietly closing behind a man who finally saw clearly. She didn't notice my silence, because she thought silence meant surrender. But this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And the more I listened to the quiet between us, the louder her mistakes became. The first thing she noticed was the card decline. A grocery run. Nothing major. But her phone buzzed. Payment failed. She texted me a screenshot. No question, just a single emoji, annoyed, expectant. I didn't reply. An hour later, another ping. Her gym access blocked. Then the subscription app she used for her meal planning gone. By noon, she was calling. I watched the screen light up and let it ring. It wasn't revenge. It was subtraction. I was peeling her off my life one layer at a time, slow enough that she'd feel it, fast enough that she couldn't react. By the third call, she left a voicemail. Something's wrong with our accounts. Call me. But there was no "our" anymore. Just a structure she didn't realize was built on my patience. And now, patience had expired. I left the city that evening. Drove 2 hours north to a lake house I'd inherited from my uncle. Nothing fancy, but quiet, clean, mine. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. Silence, after all, is more powerful when no one sees you disappear. The phone stayed off. The laptop stayed closed. I didn't check social media. Didn't leave a trail. She started emailing, then texting my coworkers, then messaging friends. The tone shifted from casual confusion to quiet panic. But I wasn't ignoring her. I was erasing the illusion that she ever had control. By day 3, she drove to my office. I wasn't there. She called my boss. He simply said I was on personal leave. Nothing more. She showed up at my parents' house. They didn't answer the door. I'd already warned them. I was done explaining things to people who once told me to be patient with her moods or give her space. She's just going through something. Now I was the one going through something: freedom. I spent that weekend clearing my mind. Running, sleeping, reading, remembering who I was before I made her the center of my world. And every time I looked at my phone, dark and silent on the table, I felt stronger. Because men like me don't break windows when they leave. We remove ourselves from the building and let them sit in the smoke. Back in the city, she was unraveling. Not because she'd lost me, she hadn't realized it yet, but because she'd lost access. And for people like her, control isn't about love. It's about proximity. She couldn't reach me, and that scared her more than any fight ever could. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to vanish. And now that I had, the real story could begin. He thought he'd won. That was his first mistake. The man who stood beside her that night on the rooftop, smirking, smug, sure of himself, didn't know that silence was a prelude to collapse. Not mine. His. I started with his name. Not the one she gave me, Matt, too vague. Too clean. But the full one I pulled from her iPad logs. Matthew Kane Burrell. A name tied to a gym franchise, 2 LLCs, and one very discreet rental apartment registered under a shell company. All public data. All legal. All vulnerable. I spent 3 days collecting everything. His online footprint was too polished. Too edited. But no one scrubs everything. Especially someone who thinks no one's watching. Tax records. Court filings. One lawsuit, sealed but flagged in a database. He was being sued quietly for breach of a vendor contract tied to one of his consulting ventures. Not big enough to make headlines, but big enough to expose weakness. I made one call, anonymously, to a blogger who specialized in corporate fraud, someone I followed for years. I sent them the breadcrumbs, just enough to nudge. No lies, just light. A week later, the first article dropped. Up-and-coming business coach accused of misrepresentation. It didn't go viral, but it reached the right inboxes. A small ripple, just enough to trigger questions from partners, investors, clients. I wasn't mentioned. Neither was she. I didn't need her name in it. This wasn't revenge. This was subtraction. Removing the fantasy she thought she traded me for. Letting it collapse on its own foundation, ego, arrogance, shortcuts. He'd been her upgrade. Now he was a liability. I watched from a distance. He posted less. His replies slowed. A comment popped up. Didn't you scam that woman in Portland? Then another. Funny how you disappeared when the heat came. I never celebrated. Because this wasn't about him. It was about her. And how easily she'd sold loyalty for the illusion of excitement. Now that illusion was cracking. And soon, she'd start looking back, wondering why I didn't fight for her, why I didn't try to win her back. But I'd never been in a competition. You only fight for what respects you. And she never did. Now she'd see what happened when the man she underestimated became unreachable. Not angry. Not bitter. Just gone. And that's the part they never recover from. Not the exit. The silence after. Because it echoes louder than any slammed door. And it leaves them not with closure, but with questions they asked themselves for years. She started showing up alone. Not dramatically. Not in tears. Just alone. Brunches. Events. Group chat she once dominated quieter now. Replies slower. Her usual sparkle? Dimmed under too much effort. People noticed. But no one asked. Because the absence said more than any announcement. I wasn't there. And that mattered. At first, she tried to style it as freedom. He needed space. He's figuring things out. But people read energy. And hers was off. She was distracted. Checking her phone too much. Laughing at the wrong time. Over-explaining simple things. One night, she went to a friend's engagement party solo. No +1. No updates. I wasn't even mentioned. Until someone asked casually, "How's everything with you two?" She paused, fork midair. Then gave a smile that looked more like a wince. "We're just taking time." The friend, Sarah, didn't nod. She just said, "You always said he was too quiet." Maybe that wasn't the problem. That was the first cracked public. She brushed it off. But the message stuck. She wasn't just alone. She was being seen that way. No scandal. No accusations. Just a slow fade no one could stop. And with each silence, I became less hers and more myth. The man who didn't yell. Who didn't chase. Who just left and never looked back. She messaged one of my closest friends. No question. Just, "Is he okay?" The reply? "He's more than okay. He's just not available." That stung. I didn't ask for that message to be sent. But I appreciated it. Because now, the narrative was shifting. She wasn't the one who chose freedom. She was the one left behind. And worse, the one being ignored. The people around her began to mirror my distance. Not cruelly, but with a detachment that made her increasingly irrelevant. No more checking in. No more, "You deserve better." Just silence, that contagious, dangerous kind. Her new guy had already pulled back, probably sensing the heat around him. Now she stood on a stage without a script. And the spotlight? It didn't feel warm anymore. It burned. Because silence isn't just absence. It's judgment. It's every unanswered text, every avoided conversation, every friend who used to validate her now simply watching. Waiting. Not for her to fix it, but to fall. And she knew it. I could feel it in the way her name popped up less and less in group threads. In the way mutual acquaintances suddenly treated her like a side character. Not because I asked them to. Because energy shifts. And mine had shifted completely away from her. She wasn't a villain, but she was no longer the main story. And in her world, that was worse than guilt. It was invisibility. She came home early that Wednesday, unannounced. No text. No call. Just the sound of keys and a door she hadn't used in days. I was in the kitchen, calm, focused, making coffee like it was any other morning. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, like she didn't know if she still belonged here. I didn't flinch, didn't welcome her, didn't stop. She placed her bag down softly, as if noise might shatter the thin threads still holding this moment together. Then she spoke. Small talk. Weather. Work. Traffic. I answered with silence. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. She walked around the apartment slowly, like a stranger touring the ruins of something she once built. Our photos were gone. Drawers reorganized. Bathroom shelves cleared. She opened her mouth once, like she wanted to ask a question, but didn't. Because the answer was already there. I wasn't angry. I was finished. She made tea. Sat at the edge of the couch. I stayed in the kitchen. Standing. Not retreating. Just not engaging. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually she said, I don't recognize this version of you. I nodded once. Because this version was never for her. It was who I was before I made myself small. Before I compromised peace for proximity. She stayed that night. Not in the bedroom. On the couch. And I didn't ask why. Because I didn't care. I wasn't cold to hurt her. I was cold because warmth had become too expensive. The next morning, she made breakfast. The kind she used to only make when she needed forgiveness. I didn't eat it. Not out of anger. Out of disinterest. She watched me from across the table like a child waiting to be told they'd done something right. But there was no praise left. No apology big enough. I got dressed. Packed a small bag. Told her I had errands. She asked, will you come back? I said nothing. Because at that point, the question wasn't if I'd return. It was why she thought I still would. She didn't cry. But I saw it, that flicker. The one where reality starts to set in. Where she realizes I'm not gone out of rage. I'm gone out of resolve. Gone in a way that can't be begged back. That evening, I returned to the apartment. She was gone. Not forever, just out. Probably trying to reclaim a version of herself in a bar, or a cafe, or someone else's company. But none of it would work. Because she knew now. Even when I was in the room. I wasn't in her world anymore. And nothing she did could bring me back. I was done giving light to someone who only remembered I existed when it got dark. Now she'd sit in that dark. Alone. It happened on a Sunday. Rain outside. Soft and slow. The kind of weather that usually pulled us together under one blanket, one rhythm, one shared silence. But not this time. She stood in the hallway, blocking the exit. Her face was pale. Not broken, not yet, but close. I need to talk, she said. I didn't answer. She stepped forward, arms crossed like armor. I know I messed up, she continued, voice steady but thin. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think you'd actually. She stopped. Because the look on my face said everything. I had already left. I was still there physically, but emotionally, I was gone. And there's nothing more terrifying than speaking to someone who no longer holds space for you. She asked if we could start over. Said she was confused, lost, didn't mean for it to happen the way it did. She said she missed me. She used my name the way people do when they're drowning. I listened. Not because I owed her that, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of her own words echoing into silence. Every sentence she threw at me came back unanswered. Not out of cruelty. Out of finality. She tried to cry. It didn't come. She was too numb. And numbness doesn't beg well. She asked if there was someone else. There wasn't. But there didn't need to be. Because when a man reaches peace after pain, nothing can compete with that. Not passion. Not guilt. Not history. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. She looked at me then, really looked, and saw it. That I wasn't fighting anymore. Because I'd already won. Not the argument. The war inside me. The one that said, Stay, explain, try to fix what's already cracked beyond recognition. I picked up my keys. She didn't stop me this time. Didn't plead. Just stood there, breathing heavily, watching the man she never thought would walk away. Actually do it. I opened the door. Paused. She whispered, say something. And I wanted to. Not to comfort her, but to mark the moment. So I turned, looked her straight in the eye, and said, I'm not angry. I'm just done. Then I left. Not with noise. Not with revenge. But with the kind of silence that ends chapters without punctuation. She didn't follow. And for the first time in months, that felt like peace. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. Like a house that had looked fine on the outside, until the foundation gave way. She stopped being invited to things. Not by design. Just naturally. The group chat slowed. People she once leaned on became polite but distant. Even her closest friend, the one who always said, you're just too much for him, stopped defending her. Because now, no one could pretend not to see. She started oversharing on social media. Quotes about healing. Long captions. Photos alone, but with captions implying strength. It fooled no one. Because pain that deep doesn't post like that. It slips out in the details. In the eyes. In the timing. In the way silence starts to surround a person who once needed an audience to survive. I didn't watch closely. But word got around. She and the new guy? Over. He ghosted her after the story broke. One of his companies folded. The other, under audit. She tried to reach out to me once more. Email. Just a blank subject line and the words, I wish we'd talked. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because she still didn't understand. I hadn't left because she cheated. I'd left because she devalued me quietly, consistently, until there was nothing left to rescue. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting myself. She showed up at my building one morning. Sat outside for over an hour. I didn't open the door. Didn't call security either. Just let her sit. Let her feel it. The absence. Not just of me. Of power. Because when men like me finally leave, we don't come back to check if you've learned. We trust you have. And move on anyway. Inside, I was different. The apartment was different. New layout. New colors. No echoes of the past. I had reconnected with old friends. Got back into running. Reading. Waking up early without anxiety. There was laughter in my days again. Not loud. Not forced. Just clean. She, on the other hand, was now a story people whispered about. She looked tired. I think she's going through something. No one mentioned me. Because I was no longer part of that orbit. I didn't need her downfall. I didn't crave her regret. All I needed, and finally had, was space. From her. From who I became while with her. From the version of myself I outgrew. And the quiet was no longer empty. It was full. Full of everything she thought I'd never find without her. Peace. Purpose. Clarity. She lost the game she didn't know she was playing. And I didn't even have to keep score. The last time I saw her, she didn't speak. We crossed paths by accident, or maybe design, in a grocery store near my new place. She froze when she saw me, basket in hand, hair tied back. No makeup. Just real. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I kept walking. Not fast. Not rude. Just forward. She didn't follow. She didn't call out. And that silence between us? It wasn't awkward. It was final. Because the man she saw that day wasn't angry. Wasn't cold. He was unreachable. And that's what broke her. Not the words I never said, but the fact that they no longer mattered. I had rebuilt everything. My routines. My circle. My mind. The version of me she tried to outgrew her instead. Not by revenge. By evolution. She tried to leave a mark on my story. But she became a footnote in hers. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I just stopped carrying her weight. And once I did, everything else got lighter. People ask me now if I'm over it. As if closure comes in neat little boxes. But the truth is, I didn't close the door. I dismantled the whole house. I deleted the blueprint. And built somewhere else. The kind of place where I don't need validation. Where silence isn't a punishment, it's peace. Where I wake up every day knowing I chose me. And I never had to raise my voice to prove it. She still watches from afar sometimes. I see her name pop up on old posts. A like here. A view there. But I don't react. Because ghosts can watch. They just don't get to come back. I'm not a lesson. I'm not a chapter. I'm the part of her story she can't rewrite. Because it wasn't hers to begin with. It was mine. And I reclaimed it. Now, when people ask why I left the way I did, I just say, I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And that's not a quote. That's the final sentence. The period at the end of everything. Been through it? When they crossed a line and you made sure they felt it.